Welcome everyone to the Individualised Living Conversations session on Explore and Design around person-centred planning. I'm Karen Tippett. I'm the Advocacy Inclusion Senior Manager at Family Advocacy, and those who may have been on our live session will know that it was facilitated by one of our staff members, Jane Scott, but we're re-recording it for quality purposes, so we're facilitating it for this evening's recording. So I'll be facilitating, and today we're joined by Meg Sweeney. Wave, Meg.
Hello.
And Linda Hughes. Now, before we go any further, of course, I'd like to make an acknowledgement to country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are on today and pay our respects to elders past and present. We acknowledge the sorrow of the stolen generations and the impacts of colonisation on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We also recognise the resilience, strength and pride of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. This artwork has actually been commissioned by a gentleman in Western Sydney, a gentleman with disability, Adam, and he depicted basically the vision of the organisation Family Advocacy here. Okay, so who are we talking with you and having this conversation tonight? Resourcing Inclusive Communities has a vision that people with disability will thrive in the heart of our communities, sharing the same everyday experiences that we all as fellow Australians have. So we provide information and resources, such as this tonight, to assist people with disability to live meaningful lives as valued members in the community. And the overarching organisation for this initiative is Family Advocacy. So this is an advocacy, New South Wales-wide advocacy organisation, and we support the leadership and empowerment of families to be able to be strong in their advocacy skills to enable that meaningful life for the person with disability in their families. So, as I said, tonight we are meeting with Meg and her daughter, Joss. Meg's actually been involved with family advocacy now for 3 decades, since the arrival of her eldest daughter, Jocelyn. And together, Meg and Joss have made sure that Joss has a purposeful life where she really is enjoying her own home, work, leisure that she wants to do, family connections and lots of recreation in Joss's life as well, which you'll hear more about tonight, all within her own local community. Joss does live with Down syndrome and she's lived independently for 7 years, moved back home for 3 years because of a debilitating illness, but now has recovered and has moved out again, which is fantastic and shows the resilience of Joss. She looks forward to watching her own movies, cooking her own dinner and not hearing her father snore. So Meg, welcome. Thanks so much for your time and coming along today. It's terrific to have you. Maybe you could just, as a way of intro, just one brief sentence on what we're seeing here with these photos of Joss.
The photo on the left, Jocelyn, when she first left school, was a volunteer at our local gym and leisure centre at the creche, because she did child studies and early childhood through TAFE and for her HSC at school. And so she had what do you call it, applying CPR and all of that first aid stuff already under her belt. So she could volunteer there, and she really loved little children. So that was an opportunity for her to connect with little kids, but also to meet women her own age or closer to her own age in our community. And she's actually not doing that anymore because she's doing other things, but she did that for 10 years. And then on the right, that's Joss actually just last week, preparing her dinner in her house. She's very happy to be back living in her own place and cooking her own food. And yeah, so it's been a real journey for her to get back to her own home.
Thanks. We look forward to hearing more about Joss's life in this conversation. And so now we have Linda Hughes, who some of you might know. Linda works with Resourcing Inclusive Communities as a capacity development coordinator for the Individualised Living project. So today, Linda's on our discussion panel and is the proud parent of Jacob, who is now 31. Jacob lives in his own home, which he shares with his housemate, Gavin. Jack is a wheelchair user. His disability means he has complex needs and a very high level of support required for Jake. Gavin provides some practical support to Jake, as well as the usual housemate stuff. Their home has a really cool cooperative vibe. I can attest to that, having been into Jake's home. And Jake's circle of support has been integral in supporting him to design a living arrangement that really works for him. So I'm guessing this is not Gavin in the photo though, Linda. Do you want to just share who this is?
No, this is Lucy, myself and Jacob at a trip to Melbourne. I suppose it was part of our early exploring for Jacob in the testing and trying out places away from home. But no, Lucy was Jacob's housemate for a while, and Jacob's been sharing with Gavin for about a month or maybe 6 weeks now. So very new, but it's going well.
You all look very happy in that photo. So thanks, Linda. We look forward to hearing more about Jake as well over the course of the evening. So person-centered planning, as it sounds simple, right? Reality is that people often come up with plans without considering actually what the person with disability needs, or before they really know what that person's preferences are or their interests are, like a deep understanding of the person, or their likes, their dislikes. So in fact, as you'll see in the video we're about to play, the disability services that support us are mostly pre-arranged, right, and pre-designed without considering the individual that's coming in to get support from that service. So person-centered planning actually calls all that into question. And this is where we want to start our thinking tonight, starting with the person, not the service. So let's have a watch of this. It's only a few minutes long, this video.
From the origin of person-centered planning, we were trying to understand and see what it looks like when we just fit people into systems and defined their needs and saw them through the eyes of what a system needs for a person to be in order to generate the funding that's required and to basically service them. And system-centered work tends to be based on a medical model which assumes something's wrong with people, and it's the system's job to fix them. And so the system is invested in defining them in terms of their deficiencies and creating a treatment plan, and then working to help people get it right before they get to be members and be whole people in the real world. So person-centered planning offers a major contrast to that, which is to say that people don't belong to systems. They belong to themselves, they belong to their families and their communities. And if we see them in a different light by the capacities that they bring, and we understand that their communities are the place where they can contribute and be citizens, then our thinking shifts dramatically from how to fit people into systems and service them there to how do we support people to live good lives in community, and then how do we take what we need from systems and services so that services are not bad, they just tend to be wired for their own purposes, for their own self-interest. So a good person-centered planning process calls into question the way we use services and invites us to really change the way most of our services are configured to be more responsive to the people and the way that they want to live in the communities that they're in.
Contact us for more information, for a free demonstration or
Okay, thank you. I think that shows a good depiction of what we mean with services guiding it. So now let's jump straight in then to hearing more about Jack and Joss. So Meg, perhaps tell us a little about Joss, who she is and how she's going.
Okay, so we were fortunate to sort of trip across family advocacy when Jocelyn was a wee little baby. And I found an organisation that was talking the language that I was talking about Jocelyn, in that her life was precious, her future was bright, there was a lot of opportunity for her, and so that led us to being involved in inclusive education. So Jocelyn went right through regular school with her brother and sister, including high school, and then TVET, which was TAFE, and then upon leaving school, we were involved too in things like what would happen after school and policy and stuff like that, which family advocacy also is involved with. But in her personal life, when she left school, typically people who live in our area would have gone to a day program or a shuttle workshop, which they call now ADEs, 30 minutes away, or 40 kilometres away in Nowra. We live south of Nowra on the coast, and that was not her community. It was not. She didn't go through ordinary school to do that with her adult life, and so we started looking at what she could do locally, because she belongs here in our local community, and it's very small. Like where we are, it's Huskisson and Vincentia are sort of joined, and so it's just like a 6 kilometre round sort of area that she haunts. And so that's where, we found the creche position. She also started working at a local bakery in Huskisson, and she used to ride her bike to and from. When she got to 21, I think she was a bit younger actually. She was 20. Our son had already gone off and left home and gone to uni. The younger sister, Monica, was about to leave home and go to uni. And Jocelyn actually had the shits with that, because it was her turn to leave home. And the younger sister was not moving out before she did. And so even though we felt she didn't have a clue about living independently, we had to respect her desire to do that as a young adult. And so at the time, the NDIS wasn't in, so we applied for something called the Supported Living Fund, so which she was successful in receiving some funding to do that, to move out of home. So when she moved out the first time, we rented on her behalf a big house locally that had a lot of space so she could share, because we thought we had safety was an issue for us, and also being lonely, but it turned out that she after some time sharing with people, it was obvious she wanted to live by herself. So is that enough for now? And then we can, or do you want me to continue?
I think that's good, a great start to understand Joss.
Yeah.
So maybe Linda then, thanks Meg, maybe Linda, we can ask you a bit more about Jake.
Yeah, thanks. Jake's history, Jake and Joss are very similar in age, and I think our the histories are very similar. Again, we were very fortunate to come across family advocacy in Jacob's early years, and really encouraged to have a vision for Jacob's future, and what that would look like. So similar to Joss, Jacob's had a regular school education. And we're looking at the mainstream work options and volunteer options for him. That's a big work in progress for us. Things like COVID upset things, but for Jacob, we also always had this vision. We didn't know how it would happen, but we always had this idea that he would never be living in a group home, and that he would always live with people who loved and cared about him, who had a relationship with him. Certainly in those early years, didn't know what was going to happen. Jake's a really social person. He likes having people around. He likes doing interesting things. He likes going to the pub. He likes drinking beer. He needs quite a bit of support with his daily life, and he needs support with communication. So it wasn't a matter of Jacob saying, I want to move out. It was a matter of me seeing when I went away that Jacob was having a really good time when I wasn't there. I'd see on Facebook that Jacob was doing all these interesting things, going to art gallery openings, catching up with friends, having people over. And sometimes they're people I didn't know, but they're people Jacob had got to know in the community. So I could see that when with living with me, we'd just sit on the sofa and watch TV all night, was very, very different to the life Jacob had when I wasn't around. The other thing I could see was that Jacob had a high level of confidence in his ability to be independent of me. He didn't need me on a day-to-day basis for emotional support either. So he felt very confident in this piece of support, the formal supports, the paid supports that he had, but also in the informal, freely given relationships that he had around him.
Thanks, Linda. So it sounds like both Joss and Jake are having really typical experiences of life, right? So how does that come about? How have you managed to have that pan out that way? Meg, if you want to start.
Well, it's similar to Linda, we had a really strong vision about what Jocelyn's life should look like, and really what guided us was what was happening for her brother and her sister. And you know, a life that was about her in the community and looking at her strengths and what she enjoyed doing, and then trying to look for opportunities for that to happen. So moving out was part of that plan. So she lived in the big house, and it became obvious that she wanted to live by herself. She hated, like, if people left their washing in the washing machine, it annoyed her. She didn't know what to do with it if she wanted to do hers. Whose food was whose in the fridge. And also we realized she was very safety conscious. She was the one that locked the doors, actually. And so we didn't have to worry about her safety either. So then she moved into a 2-bedroom unit just in the local rental market that, again, made sense in her life. You know, it was close to things that she needed to be as independent as she could be. And so she lived in her unit for 2 years. And so her life looked like she was still doing creche once a week. She worked 3 days a week. She was going to the gym. Most of that she did by herself and getting around town on her push bike. And then she had drop-in support 3 or 4 times a week, just for a couple of hours, to help her be organised at home, do her big shopping, make sure she, you know, fridge wasn't full of fungus, that sort of stuff. Yeah. And then we knew she'd get priced out of the rental market. So we started looking to potentially purchase something. And that was a challenge, but it took me 5 years, I'd have to say, to find the home we purchased. And so in the end, because we live in a tourist area, quite a lot of properties here have separate living arrangements in the one dwelling, like a granny flat or a separate kitchen, because people sublet to tourists. So I started looking for that type of an arrangement, and I found the perfect house in the right location where she could walk to the shops and get across the road safely and all of those sorts of considerations. And so in 2016, we purchased the house, and she then lived there for another 3 years. And how we afforded it was that she lived in part of the house, and then the back part of the house was fully set up and self-contained. And so we ran an Airbnb from the back of the house, and that's how we could afford the mortgage on the property, and just paid rent in the front.
Innovative thinking, isn't it? And Linda, what about with Jake? How did this come about, this sort of typical life that you've described?
Yeah, I think, as I said, we've had that vision. And as Jacob was leaving school, it became apparent that we needed more brains to help us think about Jake's future. And we started a circle of support. And I often just refer to it as Jacob's nearest and dearest. And the circle of support's evolved over time, but it became very crucial that the circle of support had a key role in supporting Jake's decision-making and our thinking around Jake's home. I think the circle of support was really useful in sort of in thinking about other ideas. So we did look at, where would Jacob live? We have our family home is wheelchair accessible. It's in a central location in Newcastle, very easy to get around on public transport and around in the neighbourhood. So that made a lot of sense. And also, of course, the family home is wheelchair accessible. The thinking also was that I can live anywhere, whereas it's going to be much harder to find an accessible home for Jacob. So there was a decision for me to move out. We looked at other options. We did think about apartments and other things, and that was part of a little bit of testing and trying out. But really, the sensible option, given Jacob's access needs, was for me to move out, and Jacob to continue. He's known as the Elvis of our neighbourhood because he's just so well known, he just knows everybody in the community so well. So that was really, important as well, that those connections stay, that he's got the relationship with the neighbours that who know him, and certainly the broader community where there's lots of things going on, and Jacob has lots of ability to participate in the local goings on in our area. There's sort of never a dull moment really in his life around here. So I think that having that was the other thing. It's part of future planning. So I'm Jacob's only parent and he has no siblings. So we needed to have a plan for the future that was well established and would be sustainable into the future should I drop off the perch. So I'm not planning on it, but who knows what the future will bring. But we've got plans well established and sustainable so that Jacob can continue living in his own home, and with the support he needs. And that includes the support of a circle of support that assist him in the direction, in the planning and the actions in his life.
Excellent. And people might be wondering about circles of support, but we actually have a series coming up later, so we'll be sharing some information on that when that's ready. Thanks, Linda, for that as well. Now, you've both sort of covered a little bit of this next question I have for you, but I think moving out of home is a huge decision for any person. So when there's needs and support needs and complexities, that's why there's so many people here tonight to listen to what others are doing ahead of them. So there's a lot of support needed to make that happen. How have Joss and Jake being supported to make that decision? I think, Meg, you said you didn't think she probably knew what it was all about. So how do you support that and help them to be thinking these things?
Well, I think the first time, I'd have to say, I think a lot of people thought we were completely crazy and maybe even neglectful. Is that a word? But we had to, like my other two kids, actually, when they left home, they didn't know anything about it either.
Yeah.
And so I think it's one of those things that you learn when you do it. And readiness has never really been that important to us, because even starting school and starting high school, if we had waited for Joss to be ready, she would never have gone. So it was that thing about honouring this is a life stage that is appropriate. So how do we make it work rather than question it? And then this time around, because Joss has been very, very ill, mentally ill, and needed to come home. And anyway, over the last 12 months, she's recovered really, really well. And so it came a few occasions Todd and I could go away. My husband and I could go away for a couple of nights to start with, 2 nights, and she was fine. to be at home by herself. And then we actually went away 2 or 3 times for 5 nights in a row. She still has some drop-in support, but sleeping in the house, the big house we call it, by herself, and looking after the cat and those sorts of things. And she really enjoyed it. She was safe, secure. When we came home, she was very pleased to see us, but she wasn't anxious and upset, and which had happened previously. So we started, my husband and I started thinking, maybe she's ready. So I just started talking to her about moving back to her own house. And as I mentioned about the Airbnb, she used to live in the front, and then we ran the Airbnb. Well, when she moved home, we had a permanent tenant in the front, a woman we know in the local community. And we didn't want Joss to move back to that part of the house because part of her mental illness was terrible paranoia and delusions, and that did not have good memories for her. And so we've left Leanne in the front of the house, and Joss has moved into the back of the house where we used to run the Airbnb. So we started, just to start with, she started coming down to us to the house when we were doing the changeovers and cleaning and stuff, and saying, how about you might like to live down here? And she warmed up to the idea more and more and more until, when we came home from being away once, it was more or less from maybe to when. And so she's actually only moved back 2 weeks ago, so it's all very new, but she's fine. She's doing really well. I stayed with her every second night to start with. She has a staff member sleep over once a week. But we are thinking about looking for a housemate for her. But we just aren't quite there yet. Like, it's small, it's baby steps at this stage to try and get it right and to make sure she's secure and safe. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, and I think what you see threaded through that is that unwavering vision that you have, keeping you going, well, okay, a knockback here or a change of pace or something, but what do we do now? So that's steps.
Yes,
that's really helpful.
Exactly. And it's a bit like Linda said. People say, well, why, if she was happy at home and we're happy to have her at home, which we were, why should she move out? And it's like, because she's young. If she hangs around with us, I see this, people age prematurely. Because we're pretty comfy on the couch too, Linda, I'd have to say. And and we've got aches and pains and moan and groan getting in out of the car and all of that sort of business. And she's a young woman. She's 32. So we've, part of that thing is keeping her young and independent and vibrant, as well as thinking about her developing the capacities and skills that will set her in good stead when we're not around to support her.
And being able to support her while you are, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
Set up and her confidence grow. Excellent. Thanks, Meg. That's really helpful. Linda, did you want to think about what you might want to talk about?
So Jake needs quite a lot of support around decision making and understanding. So really trying, the testing and trying out was, it went on for a few years. In fact, when we first started thinking about Jake living separate, like moving out or me moving out, his team of support workers got wind of it and decided to plan a trip to Sydney. And it was with the whole team of support workers went. I think it was almost the whole team. And they all went in an unpaid capacity and went to Sydney for a couple of nights. And I have to say, I was like calling, checking in, is everything okay? Pretty anxious. But Jake was having a ball. And as Meg says, that you can't have that young person life when you're living with an old person. It really is particularly when you have support needs to get out and do those sort of things. So I think that, it just made sense that again, testing and trying out, being away, all of those type of things, we could just see through Jacob's response to it that this was something that he was ripe and ready for. And I visit Jacob now, and Jacob's, we'll have a bit of a chat, and then if I stay too long, I get the goodbye mom, your house mom, with his communication device. So he's very much telling me that this is his house. that he shares with Gavin, and that, I'm a visitor, and don't wear out my welcome, I suppose.
Indeed. And that's pretty typical for 30-something year old person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, so thinking real estate terms, location, as they say, how did you explore that and think about that for well, we'll start again with you, Meg, for Joss.
Yeah, so for us, it was just all about, as I mentioned, about crossing the road safely. When she first left home, she would look both ways and have no traffic to cross the road, and she just never crossed the road if that was the case. So if she was walking or on a bike, so the council, serendipitously, whatever that word is, put in some of those like pedestrian islands. So she could look one way and then stop and then look the other way and then go. So we had these two little areas in town, in our community, where she'd be able to cross both of the major roads to get to the bike path she needed to be on to ride a bike safely. So I had to look within those pockets for either rental or to purchase. That was it. There was no point looking here or there because it wasn't going to work for her. So that was the first thing, close to the shops, so that it's, all of our neighbourhood here is pretty safe. Those sorts of considerations where she could get to and from. Now she's not riding a bike anymore, but she's catching the town bus, so to and from work and other things, and walking more than she used to. So all of that still works for her from the home that we chose to buy. Yeah,
that's really interesting, isn't it? So it's about, and again, that's person-centered. You're starting with what's her need. She needs to be able to cross the road, needs to be able to do that safely. So it's not just what can we afford in a house anywhere. It's really got to be thought through more carefully, doesn't it? And
yeah, and like I said, it took 5 years to find the right place in that right spot. It didn't come up, but in the meantime, she was trying other things out, like because there were more rentals available and those sorts of things, and also share arrangements and other things would have come up if we hadn't have, because we knew I knew what we were looking for. Because it was very clear in my mind what would work for her. And then your eyes are open to the opportunities when you come across them, when you're looking for them. Yeah,
it's being very mindful of that. And then you can talking to people then too, be looking out for you for very specific and not wasting time on just looking at anything.
That's exactly right.
Which and it still took 5 years, but worth it. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to talk a little bit generally about it, because we know that people, end up living in places where their transport costs are huge. So, or it's just a hassle to go somewhere. So we sort of really are, wanting places where, which encourage and support community involvement. And that's, when we modified the house that Jacob lives in, he was still in high school, but it was really very much at that time thinking about where's a good location, where's a location where Jacob won't need to drive somewhere to get out, where is there lots of footpath ramps so that Jake can cross the road quite easily in his wheelchair. Now, he needs a lot of support around getting around the community, but we still need to think about those type of things that support his participation. And I think the other thing that we just can really think about when we're thinking about housing is, looking at rentals, as Meg suggested, and the affordability. When people are sharing a home with somebody else, the home becomes much more affordable because you're sharing the cost of it, and that's part of an individualized living arrangement. That can be part of an individualized arrangement. And we also, know about the host option. And Meg, you were saying that that's an underdeveloped option. Do you want to talk about what your thoughts are?
Sure. So so the NDIS has a program called Individual Living Options. It's fairly new. It's like a funding bucket around supporting people in their own home. And one of the line items, if you like, or one of the things they suggest is a host arrangement. And that's where someone with a disability moves in to someone who has their own place. They don't have to own it, but they're the primary tenant, or they're the owner of the home. And then the person lives with them, and the person that is the host gets like a funding, a stipend, they call it, like some money in return for some in-home support that they might provide, like cooking dinner a couple of nights a week, or staying guaranteeing that there'll be a home overnight if the person needs that, because they wouldn't leave the house if there was a fire or something like that. And I think I personally think it has a lot of merit, but it's very underdeveloped. It sort of, I think it messes with parents' heads a bit, in that if I'm asking my son or daughter to move out, then somebody else, they're moving in with somebody else. So what's that about, But I actually think if it's a person that's closer in age to the person that has the sorts of qualities that match what the person's looking for, Jocelyn would be an ideal house sharer or host, would be someone that loves singing Celine Dion, very loudly. I don't know what the neighbours would think of that. But, so it's looking for those people, the personalities where that match to someone. So anyway, that's just a little bit. You can find out more about it. There's not a lot written about it, but on the NDIS, on their fact sheets and things like that, about individual living options, or ILO, they call it.
Yeah, and we can share some information on that, because that the NDIS has put out, and as well as some other organisations. And I think that, when we're looking at housing, there's, it's really important to explore the whole gamut that could be available, like, rentals, affordable rentals. There's a couple of organisations, not-for-profit real estate agents that offer affordable rentals. Really important, I think, to put someone's name on the public housing list, waiting list. We know that there's long waiting lists for public housing, but just recently heard from another parent whose son's been on the waiting list for 10 years. He's not got public housing, but what he has got is a subsidy for private rental. So that's just a really wonderful way of him getting into being able to afford private rental. And also thinking about shared ownership and shared equity and those type of things. Thinking, a friend of mine's son and his, both her sons have bought a house together, and one has a disability, and they haven't. I think they're both renting it at the moment, but they both got their foot into the real estate market. And for the son without a disability, that's important, but the son who has a disability, that's super important. So just really kind of having those options to help people, get their foot into the market, I suppose. And I think there's other things like co-housing and eco-villages and things like that, where there's, a conscious community set up around housing as well. So I think that really, just when you're looking for housing, be really open-minded about what entirely is around and what suits the person. As Meg was saying, around the housemate, really thinking about house sharing, who's the right person. And I think that goes to our next question, Karen.
Yeah, it does go to the next question a bit more. So just while we're on the housing a little bit more, it is about questioning a lot, isn't it? Asking questions, not just assuming that there's sort of only one or two ways to do things. There actually might be a whole lot more. So, looking into things, questioning people, asking, ringing the likes of Resourcing Inclusive Communities, for instance, and seeing other people's videos and sharing of this sort of nature of how people have done it, and see where it might land for your person. So there was a question too around foster families, Linda. So how that might work for someone that's currently in a foster family situation.
Yeah, so people who are in out-of-home care or in foster care situations, or that's for children. Foster care is for children and young adults, young people, sorry. We know that some of the host situations have evolved from people in well-established, working well, mutually well, foster people have aged out of those foster care situations, and that becomes a host situation. I think that it's really important that we think about the host not as a parent-child kind of situation, that we're really thinking about, you know, adults sharing together. And that might be with someone who's, you know, previously been a foster parent and sort of evolves into that role of host, which is slightly different. I always like to think about it because sometimes people get a bit stuck on the foster model, a foster care model, and I think that it's really a much better way of thinking about a host situation is my Facebook page was full of these posts recently about home share for international students. So the idea is that I would, you know, that it was asking me if I wanted to invite an international student into my home. They were, you know, young adults who were coming from overseas to study in Australia. And there's a little bit of an obligation on me in hosting a student in the same way that there would be as a host of a person with a disability. In that type of arrangement, in that, you know, I would, you know, you're supportive, you're providing a supportive environment, and you know, maybe assisting with meals and understanding how to get around and etc. So we're sort of looking at those type of, you know, those type of arrangements which are like typical for young people.
Yeah, already exist out there. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so the next question we did want to ask you about house sharing and how you know, the living alone versus having a housemate and how that would work and what's going to be the best for your people. So maybe if you, Meg, start off with how that thinking worked for Joss.
Yes, sure. So as I said, the first time it became clear her life was so full that she wasn't going to be lonely in the evenings and safety wasn't an issue. So she lived by herself for 6 or 7 years initially. This time, her life isn't quite, there's still a lot going on, but there is more downtime. And it's not good for her to spend a lot of time in her own mind because of the illness that she's had. So we're exploring the idea of her sharing with somebody. She is open to it, but we have to look for the right person. And we actually haven't started that yet. So she has a little bit more paid support just out of her core, because we haven't applied for this funding yet, out of her core funding to pay for some paid support in the evenings just to help her cook and provide some company and keep everything ticking along just at the moment. But when I talked to Jocelyn about who would she like to live with, this was more or less the list she came up with. She wants to live with a lady, a non-smoker, no drugs. My words are alcohol in moderation. She said little bit grogs in her terms. They can be religious but not talk about it. And that's through life experience. One of the people she shared with before was very enthusiastic about their religious beliefs and wanted to convert every person that walked in the door, including Jocelyn's supports. And Jossie really didn't like it at all. It would be good if they had a cat or a small dog, be reliable and tidy, polite, no swearing or fighting. They have to like cooking because Joss loves to cook. She's very good in the kitchen, great with a knife, but she won't eat any of that, but she likes to cook it. And so someone that Jocelyn can cook with would be really great. And I think a big thing to think about is like Joss has she calls them helpers or support workers, her helpers coming and going. You know, they will still happen if she has a housemate, people to help her with the washing and help her do this and to do that. So they have to be okay with helpers coming and going, and also her family coming and going and friends of hers coming and going. And with that, part of the thing we talked about is that it's a bit like Linda said about cooperative. We use different terms, but part of the agreement or arrangement would be that the house sharer can welcome people in their networks over for a barbecue or a film night or something like that, and Jocelyn would be welcome to be part of that. equally, if Joss has a barbecue or a family or a nephew come over and niece, then the house sharer would be welcome to be part of that. So that you join, you know, it's about community and sharing time together. Someone that just wants to rent a room and come and go like a ghost is not the right person for Joss at all. And if anything, it wouldn't be neutral. That arrangement would be damaging for Jocelyn, because she wouldn't know, are they here, aren't they here, all of those sorts of things. So then she came up with this idea of what could we do together, and I helped her a bit with that. So cooking, welcoming their friends, making cakes, which Joss loves to do. We live near the beach, so in daylight saving, after dinner they could go down for a swim. If they have a little dog, they could walk the dog together, watch movies or series, water the garden. I'm the gardener, but having someone to water the garden would be terrific. Reminding her to bring her clothes in off the line. You know, just being a mentor around particularly change of seasons. Joss isn't real great, you know, realising you don't need the woolly jumper now that it's springtime, or, you know, you need to take a jumper if it's winter. So helping with that, and you know, just the general stuff. Have you got your wallet and your keys and your hat and your brolly or whatever she might need for the day, just before she leaves. So there's sorts of things. And someone might not do all or any of those, but they're just ideas of what the person could potentially do, and to be supportive of Jocelyn in her home.
It's a really good idea. And those things might change and warp and move around too, mightn't they? But that's a really good idea to synthesize it, I think, like that. Helps with the finding the right person. Thanks.
Because if you have a list like this, like, it'd be ideal for someone to live with Jocelyn that likes swimming and likes going to the beach. You know, if they don't, then, you know, that's going to, you know, be, well, it just takes away from the opportunity of doing things in common. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, helpful. And Linda, was there something similar with Jack, or how have you sort of thought about that living alone, the house sharing?
We know that Jacob's personality is social, and he thrives when there's people around, and he's got meeting people. He's got people around him who are doing interesting things. It makes his life more interesting. It means that Jake's not sitting watching TV. It means that he's involved in what other people are doing. And Jake's a man who requires quite a bit of support to develop relationships with people. So he needs, you know, someone who understands his communication and can be a really supportive communication partner. So it really made sense for Jacob to be sharing his house. Oh, the other thing that he does like doing, he does like watching trashy TV. So we had to find a housemate that would enjoy that. But it was really clear Jacob would benefit from a housemate, and particularly a housemate who already had their own good social networks. And like Joss was saying to Meg, you know, someone who would welcome their friends to the house and include Jacob, and Jacob vice versa. Jacob also has a good network of people around him, but he needs help to sustain that. And so really, you know, helping someone, you know, having a housemate who would share their networks. Jake shares his. There's a lot of mutual, you know, reciprocation there, and just, you know, enjoying each other's company. So that was really clear that we were looking for the right housemate for Jacob. Jake's support needs are very complex. So in terms of the practical support that Jacob's housemate provides, Jake's housemate tends to provide practical support in terms of gardening, home maintenance, lawn mowing, and those type of things. But it's also there's a commitment to be spending time with Jacob in the evenings, hanging out with Jacob. You know, trivia last night. There's so we have an agreement about the number of hours that he'll be, you know, spending, you know, with Jacob, as well as sort of involved in the stuff that happens around the house that Jake can't do, and Jake can't be assisted. Jacob can't mow the lawn. He can't, like, we haven't yet worked out an assisted way for Jake to mow the lawn. He can vacuum and do a lot of the house tasks with active support, but the lawnmower, we haven't worked it out, and maybe we haven't put our mind to it properly. But at this stage, it's a good job for somebody else in the house to do.
So when thinking of supports, then even if you've got anything else you wanted to add, both of you, in terms of how that support works, I think that's a lot of the questions people have in terms of, well, if they're just a housemate, why would they be doing some of this support work if at all? So how do you navigate that, Meg?
Okay, so so in relation to those things that they could do with Jocelyn, like the what do you call it? The relationship is that they would receive a financial, benefit from in agreement out of Jocelyn's funding. How much that would be would depending on what it would look like. And that's perfectly okay to do that, even if you don't do it through ILO, through your core funding. You can pay a stipend, is what they call it, to the housemate. Reduced rental is something as well. Like we don't quite know yet how we're going to do it, but perhaps offering someone reduced rent as well as the stipend will probably be something that we will go for. But we don't quite know yet how that will look, but they're the things that we've thought about. In relation to the duties, I'm absolutely with Linda. The role of someone is a housemate. It's not a carer or a support worker. And so the age for me is important, because I find the older people get, the more likely you slip into a carer role, which Jocelyn does not want. So that's why we thought about 45. If we find someone, it's pretty groovy, that's a bit older, we might think about it. And also, as far as duties, like personal care is something that a housemate would never do for somebody else. So I would really hesitate or counsel not to involve any sort of personal care type of actions with a housemate responsibility. That certainly lays in paid support. In my opinion, to keep the role right, which is not carer or support worker, it's housemate. Yeah.
Being
I think it's
mindful of that, therefore, paid support isn't part of it.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think what's useful is to think about, housemates. And I lived in a number of share houses when I was younger, and we were supportive of each other, and often it was emotional support. Someone broke up with their boyfriend, and there's sort of the support that you give friends, and just we had a nice supportive in different ways. People had different roles in the house. I had one housemate who was just quite enjoyed cleaning, and I was pretty cool with that. But I cooked the dinners, so there was sort of different. People have different roles in the house often, and I think you just can think about how it might work in a share house with people who don't have a disability. And I suppose it's probably a bit of a lens here. We could even contrast it to the traditional group home, where people with disability are forced co-tenants. They're not choosing to live together. And I suppose we can also think about that in terms of their roles are not meaningful either, if they have any at all within that context. So I think it's really useful to think about what other people are doing, perhaps who are sharing a house when they don't have a disability.
Yeah, I think that thinking typical and ordinary first, and Meg, you were talking to that as well, right? You're thinking about that first before thinking about what that support might look like, and you haven't even determined how it's going to work with the housemate yet, depending on who that person is and what their needs are, right? So it's not trying to get it all right and then do it.
So we've sort of got things in place, like we can employ more helpers in the evenings, but I think ideally, like my husband and I've been talking actually since I've been thinking about this, a housemate, it's not just about there to remind Joss to do stuff. They bring, like we said, community and people and relationship and those sorts of things, which a worker by themselves coming and going, like the same person 2 or 3 times a week and another person do not. Like they're in a work role. So I'm coming around more and more to, I actually think we need to be looking for a house share with Joss, but we've got things in place to take us through to find the right one, because it might take quite some time. I'm expecting to find the right person. Yeah.
And
And
so
I
that
think-
list and sorry, Linda, that list that you put together
Yes.
with Joss then really helps her to be very involved, so she can be feeling happy about this too, because originally she wanted to live alone, right? So is that
Yeah, she's more open to the idea of
Yeah.
living with someone now than she was back then.
Linda, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think that I just was going to add that for Jacob, we just advertised we put out our feelers for our personal networks and Jacob's support circles networks and the people who know him. We put the feelers out for a housemate. So ideally, his first 2 housemates came from Jake's networks. That would probably be ideal because the person is a bit more of a known quantity. But in this recent round of looking for a housemate, we've looked through, we advertised on housemates.com or flatmate finders. And so it's sort of probably the same way a lot of people, or it is the same way a lot of people find housemates. But we had that getting to know you period was extended over a 3-month period. So we needed somebody who wasn't urgently looking for housing, but somebody whose interest was piqued by this. You know, it's an interesting way of living. So we, needed someone who was going, well, that sounds pretty interesting, and I'm up for that. And we went through quite a process of, and which included trying it out. So Jake's housemates stayed over for the weekend and got a sense of what it was like to have, as Joss had, having helpers around, Jake's support workers around. So it's really just getting that sense of what it's like to live in a share house with Jacob. Before there was a firm commitment on both our parts, and then there was a written agreement as well as to the responsibilities. And each time Jake's had a housemate, we've tailored that agreement a little bit to the person and what they bring to the home.
Okay, thank you. And no, you guys have touched a bit on some safety concerns, but it certainly is one of the big barriers for families to think of, right? How do we keep people safe? So could you elaborate now on how you're working through that to try and make sure that both Joss and Jake are safe in their homes as well?
I think you can make safety really a thing that's much bigger than it really is. So I think sometimes you just have to try, you have your, what do you call it, your sensors and fire blankets, and talk to people. Like we'd never have candles in the house ever, even if and that'll be one of the rules for a house sharer. It's just, for us, it's an unnecessary risk. We other things, like we have a lockbox. So if Joss locks herself out or other people need to get in, you can access the key to get in. And she's so safety conscious. When she lived out of home before, she locked herself out of the house numerous occasions, putting the bins out. So in her nightie, unprepared, So we did have a close neighbour who used to then ring us and say, oh, Joss has locked herself out, put on bin night, So we'd go down and that's when we put the lockbox in, so she could get herself back into her house independently. So one of the things, we do have a religious community live locally that are like to door knock, and that used to be distressing for Jocelyn, have strangers turn up and want to talk to her. And so I asked if they had a do not knock register, and they did, and they were more than happy to, they perfectly understood, more than happy to say, oh, well, we'll just miss your daughter's house, that's fine. So that was helpful. Knowing your neighbours, I think, is really important. In my experience, I don't have the expectation that neighbours, they're going to be friendly and neighbourly, but they're really happy, in my experience, to keep an eye on things. I have found everywhere Jocelyn's lived, people have been very keen on just keeping an eye on things, and they will let us know if something to them just doesn't seem quite right. And I think that that's good. I don't think that's being nosy. I think that's being neighbourly. And this time around, we've got Leanne, like this permanent tenant in the front. So Joss has her phone number. She's very open to Joss knocking on her back door if anything happens. And I know if she hears Jocelyn being upset or anything like that, she will be on the phone to let us know straight away. So that's some of the things that we've thought about.
Linda, did you want to add what you?
Yeah, so I think, for housemates, the same as support workers, you want to do a thorough vetting, your police checks and your we use a working with children check. We don't use an NDIS worker screening, but that would be an option, even though they're not a worker. But you're just kind of using the tools that are available to do proper vetting. Reference checks and talking to somebody who knows the person, who's known the person for a really long time, is a really good idea as well. So you're sort of getting a bit of a real idea about who the person is. And this is, I would say, the same if you're employing support workers as well. These are the checks that I think are really important for everyone. For Jacob, who has complex communication needs and who might find it difficult to say or to articulate when things aren't going well, we find that really important that that we do those proper checks. Jake's circle just call in randomly, and that's actually something that they do out of friendship and relationship with Jacob, but it's a bit of a strategy around the house as well, is that they'll just call by. They're in the area, they'll knock on the door and call by. I live 2 doors up. Jacob's got a really good coffee machine. I'm down there most mornings for a cup of coffee to see how things are going, to go and say good morning to him. So not every day, but quite often I'm there as well. And Jacob's grandma lives around the corner. And Jacob's grandma, she's I'm gonna say she's not good on boundaries. So she's like, knock, knock, oh no, key in the door, knock, knock, and then she's walking in. And we're kind of having to sort of, well, Mum, there's Jake's sharing with a housemate, and she's like, oh, it's okay. So perhaps that's something that perhaps could have been written in the agreement, but she's just Jake's grandma's just really important. But catching up with Jake, it's really important for her, and she's just a great safeguard as well. So I think that I'm always really kind of struck by the I think it's Michael Kendricks who says people keep people safe, and that's something that just to me is really important, that Jake's just got people around that are looking out for him, whether that's the neighbours or family and friends. And I think we're just also being in tune with Jake, so if something's not going well, when we can sort of pick up on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. So that's come to the end of our sort of formal questions, if you like. I mean, there was we answered the foster family question, but there was also one about how rent gets paid. So did one of you want to talk to that a bit?
Well, I think I did mention before about using funding. I know some people charge rent for the housemate, but then the person gets a portion of money from the NDIS out of the person's core funding or the ILO, and then that enables them to pay the rent and still actually have some money over in relation to for the support that they provide the person that's living there. So, but how that actual looks in dollars and cents is very individual in every circumstance. So, but you can use funding in order to give this a benefit, if you like, to the supportive housemate.
Yeah. It's I think it's as you say, like it's just really individual and in terms of what that benefit looks like. It would depend on, perhaps if there's an agreement around home, so a person's home so many nights a week, or if they're sometimes they're, a housemate might be providing that being there overnight assistance. If someone just needs someone there overnight, nothing to do, go to bed, wake up, all of that stuff. It's just having another person in the house. So that's, these type of things need to be written up in an agreement as well, alongside any benefit the person receives, for whatever they bring to the home. So, and that, yeah, that can be paid for through an individualized living arrangement. The host families, there's some work done in WA around the payment being tax-free, and private rulings with the tax office. It starts to get pretty complex. But again, those payments can be made from, an ILO package. And we certainly know people who are paying it from, just using the individualized, just using flexible core funding, as well to ensure that, to make that payment. And it's cost effective because they're not being paid at an hourly rate. It's, it's interesting because a support worker sitting on the sofa watching TV is paid the same amount as a support worker doing rather complex support. So it's a good time to start thinking about, well, when's it just being there and it's not really support? And how can a housemate do that? And it doesn't need to be paid at that hourly rate if you're just the person hanging out and having fun. You really,
And I think just thinking about that, Linda, like you said, a cool cooperative vibe. I think having a place that is very welcoming, I think is so important for both your family member and the person that they're supporting, and their housemate or housemates. So making a place really welcoming and somewhere people want to be and want to come and spend time, I think is really worth considering.
Yeah. And I think there's also a really interesting thing, I suppose, just to add, is Jake's housemate is a DJ, and he's got his records set up in the living area because that's where you play music, and that just brings another element to the house as well. So you want people to have that sense, housemates to have that sense of this is their home. I mean, this stuff gets negotiated in all houses, but this is, something that's really great for Jacob as well, and brings another element to his home and another element to his interests and enjoyment, alongside his housemate, with his housemate.
Yeah, which is what person-centeredness is all about, right? And that's what's been so nice about all your contributions today from both of you, is it all revolves around Joss and Jake. It all revolves around what will work and what wouldn't, because the DJ thing might not work for someone else that has some difficulty with music or doesn't like it or whatever. So you've got to find that balance that actually works for the individual, and that's what you've done so well. And I think that's when success can be set up well, right? So thank you both. We have come to the end. So yes, Linda's just put up the information here to contact us at Resourcing Inclusive Communities if you want to talk through any of this. You've just got queries and just want to unpack a few more things. There's a phone number there, 1-800 number, Linda's direct email, or just a more generic email because there's a few people in the team. So please do use us and reach out. And also we're part of a capacity building group of organisations called National Alliance of Capacity Building Organisations, or NACBO as we say. So for some people maybe from other areas of Australia, and you've got this slide here which we'll be sending out to everybody as well, that indicates where you might be able to reach out to a similar organisation where you live. So thank you again, Linda and Meg, and to also Joss and Jake for allowing us to share their experiences and stories with others. So if there's any parting words, feel free to say something now.
Well, I think it's about doing it, and it starts with thinking. It starts with the vision and thinking about it and knowing it can happen, and then moving forward from there.
I agree. It is that idea. And in another webinar we've had, there was described as the leap of faith that people will want to live with your family member and will enjoy living with them. And, you know, this is going to be a great experience this for everybody involved, I suppose.
Fabulous. Thank you. Goodbye to all.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.